Welcome to Enneagram Conversations with Renee Siegel. Maybe you know your Enneagram type, but what's next? Renee uses the Enneagram in conjunction with self-awareness practices to help people better understand the patterns of their type, including patterns of thinking, emotions, and behaviors. This show is highly interactive. Listen or call in to find out how to identify your type. And for those who do know their type, what can you do next to open yourself up to a greater capacity for personal transformation? We all have great strengths, sitting alongside areas that we need to strengthen. It starts with noticing your patterns. You'll begin to discern whether you need to step in and take action or just sit back and observe. Learn how to dance between observation and participation and watch yourself transform. Enneagram Conversations starts now.
Welcome to Enneagram Conversations. I am your host, Renee Siegel, and I am delighted today because I have as a guest a dear friend and colleague named Sarah Dimock, who is here to talk to us about the 3 centers of intelligence. And as we lay the foundation for the Enneagram, everybody I know is excited to touch into their type and hear more about their type. And I promise you, in the last 9 episodes, we will go into a full-bodied discussion of each of the 9 types, but we want to set up this conversation so that you can get the most of it. And today we're going to talk about the 3 centers of intelligence. So Sarah, welcome. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, I'd like to say how happy I am to be here with you. I love working with you and talking with you. And I love talking about the 3 centers. So my background originally was in education, and then I became a mental health therapist, and then really started focusing on working with the Enneagram as a teacher and coach. And I sort of say the Enneagram's been working on me for over 20 years. I've been working with it, but it's really been working on me, and it's a deep love of my life. I own a business called 9 Site Enneagram for Transformation, where I do trainings and work with people directly to help use this amazing tool to become more and more full in their lives and their best selves. So it's a pleasure to be here with you.
And I love working with you too. And so I'm really excited that you get to help our listeners understand more about the 3 centers. And before we dive into what each of the centers are, let's talk about why we have 3 centers and what they have to do with the Enneagram.
Yeah, so maybe the mystery is why we have 3, but the fact that, we in the Enneagram community see it as clear that there are 3, if not more going on than 3. But I think of these 3 centers as sort of like the elemental typology. 9 is the variations of these 3 centers. And then there's even more from there. But this is kind of like the core of it. There's the sort of threefold nature of being alive and being a human being. And one of the things that I think is helpful about learning the 3 centers before the 9 types is you're actually able to start to locate all of it in you. And that's one of the things that's cool about the Enneagram is, yes, you have a home base in your type, but all of it's going on in you. And understanding the bias and also the wholeness is they belong to each other. So starting with the 3 centers, we can start to see that we have a wholeness and we have a bias. And I'll say one more thing about it, which is for me, working with the 3 centers really helps me apply the Enneagram in the moment, day to day. Maybe I feel a little like I'm caught in my stuff, and I can tap into my 3 centers directly and sort of reorient. So they're like right at hand instead of concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are the 3 centers? Ta-da!
So the way we talk about them in this tradition is the body or belly center. My hands are down here by my belly, the heart center and the head center. And often, in Western culture, we think of intelligence here, but in this tradition, we see three distinct forms of intelligence that are most wise when they're working together or all available to us.
Yeah. And really, we call it, in the way that I know you and I have both been trained, the three centers of intelligence, or the three ways of knowing. And I love that you talked about this as being as part of us being human beings, because there are many other ways that we really can't quantify or even describe with words about how we access information through a power that's greater than ourselves, a force field that exists that holds us all in oneness, and a lot of things that we really don't understand. But at least these three centers begin to allow us a conversation about how we're opening up portals of ways of knowing and accessing information that, when they are all working together, you have the best hair days on the planet, right? It really rocks. And so, and I'll say this again, probably in each of our segments, that the goal is not to look at one or look at the other, but to find a way to be present with all of them, open them all up, and then integrate them all, allow them all to, and invite them all to have a conversation with one another, to integrate with one
Actually,
another.
I often use that metaphor of a conversation. Like, you imagine your three centers at a bar table having a conversation, and how do they all relate to one another? Is one of them talking the whole time and never shutting up, and the other one's kind of like disengaged? But when it's all humming and all of them are participating, it's very stimulating and very engaging and very balanced.
Yeah. And that's a challenge, because it's much easier for most of us to access one or two of them than all three. And that's going to be a conversation that we'll get into in the next couple of segments. So how do you think that each of the Enneagram types better understand themselves when the centers are open?
When the centers are open, we can perceive a lot more about what's going on. They're actually realms that each one kind of lets us check out and register. So a lot of the work with the Enneagram is about self-awareness. But if you're just doing that in one or two kind of areas, you have a lot of blind spots, and you're missing some key information. And when I say information, I don't mean, bullet points that give me a self-concept about my type. I mean, what's actually happening right here, right now? Is my body getting tense? Am I freaking out about how somebody else sees me? Am I telling myself stories about how it's supposed to go right now? The more I know about these three domains, the more I might be able to catch that I'm getting enlisted into an old habit, and I'm not being fresh in the moment anymore. So it just gives you more tools and more instruments of perception.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that certain Enneagram types are likely to have a particular center open than another? I mean, do we notice that?
Yeah, yes. And I would say there are some general teachings about that. So, for example, we're going to talk a little bit more about which Enneagram types are sort of grouped with each center, but it's not as straightforward as all the body types are really in their bodies, or athletic or coordinated. It's not like that. But most of them have a very particular relationship with that domain that they're negotiating all the time. So we get a little caught up in it, as it were. We're caught up in, let's say, how the other person's seeing me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not that people who are heart types are actually have their hearts more available to them all the time, which is a common misunderstanding in this teaching.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, it seems like, we'll get into this more, but it seems like there's one of the three types that has less access in a generic kind of way to that particular center within each one of those triads. So within the body center, there's one type that seems to be far more asleep to the body. And then within the heart center, there is one type that is really far more asleep to the value of having open-heartedness. And within the head types, there is one type that is more likely to have less true access to an innate concern for, let's say, safety, security, and certainty, and it's more off. It's off. So I'm really glad that we're going to get into this in a really full-bodied way, because I think people do have an understanding. They make an assumption, oh, I'm a body type, so I am really body aware. And yet we find that body types, as we coach and counsel clients all the time, some of our body types come in and they're like really body unaware,
Or they're overdoing the body, or they don't know that they're reading through the body. They think it's through the mind.
That's right.
But it's really coming from a instinctual place. So this teaching can help clarify some things that we take for granted, like the water we're swimming in, and the way we see things that another person might not. I think it's a more, I don't mean more profound than the Enneagram types, but maybe more pervasive as a way of looking at how people really approach the world differently.
Yeah, that is so true. So is there anything else before we go to break and kind of go into the centers, each specific center, that you feel is kind of important for us to share with our listeners about just laying the foundation for this conversation?
Yeah, I guess I would say that my experience in myself and in working with others is that when we start to get access to all three centers, maybe not in perfect balance, but they become more developed in us. That, like you said, you have a great hair day, but your life starts feeling more full.
Yes.
There's more agility or aptness in terms of what you're able to do with your insight, that it's like you're playing with a full deck.
Yeah.
and you're less askew. So I think the promise of this, even if you don't really end up loving the Enneagram, you can work all the time with your three centers in the moment, useful way that helps you be more present and available and actually satisfied.
Yeah.
Because when we're off and we're approaching life, we're going to get funky results.
Yeah. Yes. So true. So we're going to go to break. And before we do, I thank you again for joining myself, Renee Siegel, your host, and Sarah Dimock, who is here to help unveil the foundational piece of the three centers of intelligence. When we come back from break, we'll move into the body center. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you want more information about me, you can find it at yourpurepotential.com, the letter U, the letter R, purepotential.com. Thank you so much, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Enneagram Conversations, where today we are laying the foundation for a larger, deeper understanding of the three centers of intelligence in the Enneagram, in our Enneagram study: the body, the heart, and the head. The body, or instinctual intelligence, is responsible for helping us access information and a way of knowing. And so are the heart centers, which is an emotional level of helps us access emotional intelligence, and the head, or the mental center, which helps us to access intellectual intelligence, which is the one we pay most attention to. So we're not going to start there. We're going to start at the top of the Enneagram map or diagram, with the 8s, 9s, and 1s, talking about body and instinctual intelligence. So, Sarah, if you could talk to our listeners a little bit about what the types are that are part of this group, not just the numbers 8, 9, and 1. Fill in the blanks, because those are just numbers, right? And they really don't describe what an 8, a 9, and a 1 represent within that triad.
Sure, yeah. So the 8, 9, and 1, we usually see the center type as the prototype of each triad. So the 9, in this case, is seen as kind of the template of the body types, and the 8 and 1 as variations of that. So each of those, the 8 is maybe trying to figure out how to use the body energy, the instinct, for a kind of overt uh, wanting to use power and control to affect the world in a certain way. The 9 is trying to harmonize the energies around. All 3 of them are tracking what's going on around them, the external world, and trying to interact with it in a way to make it go the way they think it's supposed to go. So the 9's trying to make it more peaceful. The 1 is trying to make it more perfect, to shape it up, to improve it. So the 8 wants to make it fair and just and clear and true. And so each of these are in us, and we all have a body center, but these 3 types are maybe more prominently run by this feeling. I don't know if feeling is the right word, this compelling instinct to use the self to try to negotiate life, right? Almost to control life, to be more like what it seems like it's supposed to be. And that's read through the body. So it's sort of like, something feels off here. It's not like some high ideal. It's like the 8's feeling like something's not fair. Something feels like somebody's doing something funky. I'm going to address it. Or the 9 might feel like, oh, I can feel the conflict over there between those 2 people. What can I do to kind of ease up the tension in the room? Or the 1 might feel how things are inefficiently being run, and I might be able to make things, be even more optimal here. So it's a response to life that comes from a felt sense in the body. And not all body types know that they're feeling it in the body. They register it there, and then it kind of goes upstream and gets processed. But body types have an intelligence, and all of us have this through our belly center, an intelligence about what's happening right here, right now, in the moment, in this immediacy. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I want to say, the temperature gauge and the RPMs in your car. It's like reading what's here right now and what needs to adjust.
Yeah. Could you spend just a moment talking about the difference between, emotional feelings and sensate feelings? Because I think, we hear the word feeling and we just, I think, assume, or maybe we don't, or maybe people get them mixed up, that it's an emotion, but we forget that there are at least 5 senses that we can describe that are also feelings. They're felt sense. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Thank you. So there's emotions, right, which usually we'll talk about as feelings. And then there's felt sense or sensation, which these 2 can commingle. They often co-occur. But to delineate them, the felt sense is something you could describe without a lot of meaning, right? It's like I'm looking at density or energy or temperature or fullness or emptiness or tension or looseness. They're kinesthetic terms, really. Like maybe I feel tingling in my legs. I might feel that when I'm afraid, but fear is the emotion and the tingling is the sensation. Yeah. So often certain emotions will bring on certain felt senses, and sometimes we'll just have a felt sense and then it gets translated to an emotion like sadness. But it's, I would say sensations are a direct registering in the nervous system of the felt effect, even of a thought, of a situation, of a feeling.
Yeah. Oftentimes, I love that you're talking about it in this way, because oftentimes clients can be dissuaded or they'll negotiate with other people around whether or not their thoughts are valid or their feelings are valid. But if you stub your toe and it hurts, you're really hard pressed to tell a person, no, your toe really doesn't hurt. It's kind of a really grounding, truthful, in the present moment way of settling into an aspect of what is real at that time for you that's really not negotiable.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. Is the directness of the perception. even if it's through your filter, it's really what's happening right now for you.
Right.
And it's not mitigated by meaning or story or interpretation. I mean, that might be going on too, but the felt sense is not.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
direct.
Yeah. So we have lots more to talk about. So within these 8s, 9s, and 1s, we'll give each of them a couple of names. That doesn't mean we're going to go through all the names that are used for the 8, 9s, and 1s, because there's more popping up all the time in our Enneagram world. But could you give a couple of names to the 8 and talk a little bit about how the 8 negotiates their instinctual intelligence?
Yeah. So the 8 is often called the protector or the boss. It has a very forward energy with the belly. It's sometimes called the gut of the gut. It's like often even folks who are not very in touch with their belly centers will feel 8's presence physically, like taking up space or having impact in the room. So the way 8 is trying to use that, well, actually 8 doesn't try to use that. So instinctual. It's sort of like, I trust it above all else, right? And I don't even know that I'm doing that. It's like, when I feel something in my body, it's real. It's like it's the truth. And so they're able to move in situations very quickly and directly toward what feels like right action to them. It may or may not be, but it's very convincing in the body of the 8. Like, that person's taking advantage of that person and nobody's stepping in. Boom, I'm there and I'm stopping it and I'm calling it out. It has a direct, forceful, straightforward energy trying to make sure the world's safe and right. And we can say plenty more about all these types in terms of how they use the instinctual energy, but I'll just keep going with the 9 and the 1 to give the perspective first. So the 9 is often called the peacemaker or the mediator, and it's trying to harmonize the energy of what's inward and what's outward. So 9s get confused about, they actually feel the sense of self out there around them, which is distinct about 9s. Everybody can read things to some degree, but 9s actually are displacing their belly into the surround. And so what they're reading around them is kind of like a sense of, if there's disturbance in the environment, I need to do something about it because I feel it all in my body. And then the type 1 is called the critic or the reformer or the perfectionist. And it has a sense of uprightness in the body, of trying to use the instinct toward an ideal, whatever I think is the right order of things. So there's a lot of charge, but it's transferred through the head center often to try to do the right thing and control the instincts in a way so that I don't do the wrong thing. All the gut types, the body types, have a sense of right and wrong that's kind of based in a felt sense.
Mm-hmm. And each of them is also negotiating anger in a particular way. I know we don't have very much time, but if you could just talk about how each one of them is negotiating anger and why anger shows up, what that might be about.
Yeah, I would say that there's an emotion that's associated with each of the 3 triads of the centers. And in this case, it's like I'm trying to manage anger in a certain way or cope with it or cover it up. So 8 is more like kind of thinks anger is underrated, like it's a useful force and let's just go with it. 9 is trying not to have anger so that it can harmonize. And 1 is charged with anger, but is repressing it to try to, not do something bad or harmful. So they're both, all of them are under and overdoing it because they're trying to manage it.
Yeah. And all of them are utilizing anger in this particular triad as a means of managing power and control. Whether it's power and control in their own life, power and control out there, power and control in their environment.
Right. And it comes down to a basic existential sort of thing that we're not going to open up right now, but these are the power and control are generalized words. So you may or may not think a body type is controlling, but inwardly they're working on it a lot. and sometimes outwardly too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. So that was like such a incredibly full packed brief summary of each of the 9 types and how they manage the body or instinctual intelligence. Remember, we have all types that experience body intelligence, whether you sit in that, your type sits in that triad or not. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to take a quick break and come back and move into the heart or the emotional intelligence triad. And I thank you for joining. I'm Renee Siegel, your host. And if you'd like to find out more about Enneagram Conversations or my practice, please look me up at yourpurepotential.com. That is the letter U, the letter R, purepotential.com. I look forward to diving into our heart triad next. Thank you. Welcome back to Enneagram Conversations. I am Renee Siegel, your host, and I am so privileged today to have Sarah Dimock with me to discuss the 3 centers of intelligence within our study of the Enneagram. And we are now going to move into the second triad we're discussing, which is the heart triad, which includes types 2s, 3s, and 4s, and talk about heart-centered intelligence, emotional intelligence, that aspect of accessing knowing through this particular center. So, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit more about the center itself and each of the types?
Yeah. I feel this kind of swelling of my own heart as I'm thinking about the heart center and what it brings online for us. So I think of the heart center as wise in a lot of ways, but one of the ways it's especially wise compared to the other 2 centers is relationally. So it's reading not only my feelings toward the other or others, but it's reading others and their regard toward me. It's not the only thing the heart center does, but it's a specialty. And so this sensing, how am I being seen? How are you taking me? How am I feeling toward you? What's the synchrony here? How's the regard? And this is one of the most primal things as humans and mammals that we look for is the gaze, right? And what do I mean to you? And so the heart intelligence helps us pick up on that kind of thing, almost like a friend of mine calls it like bat sonar, like you're getting this ping back. You're reading what's around you and receiving it back to understand where you are in relationship to those around you. And that happens automatically in almost all of us. And in heart types, it happens in a more loud way. It becomes more central to the heart types and more defining about whether I'm okay in general as a human being, if I'm getting the kind of pings back that I hope for. So each of the heart types is looking for a particular kind of feedback from the other. And I'm crafting myself and adjusting my image, my behavior to try to get the right kind of ping back. It's sort of, I want to land on you in a certain way, and I want to know from you that I'm landing on you in that way.
Yeah, it's seeking engagement in some fashion, and some of the engagement is can be more comfortable in a business perspective, even though it's the heart type, and some of the engagement can be related to how somebody else is doing, and in one of the heart types, it's far more about I'm really consumed with my own inner landscape. And so I'm really excited for you to dive into these 3 types. So let's start with type 2, even though it's not the center point. And if you'd like to talk about the center point to begin with, and as you did in the previous triad, that's fine too, because that might be helpful.
Well, I'll just name something about the center points. That's the 9, the 3 in this case, and in the next group, the 6. As you were sort of alluding to earlier, these are the types that have a conflicted relationship with the center. And one way it's said, I think this is Hurley and Donson say that those 3 types prefer and repress the same center.
Right.
So they're reading it and using it very largely but they're also stopping it. They're also not going there. So in this case, the 3, I'll talk about in a moment how that's happening, but I will start with the 2. So the 2, called the giver or the helper often, is aiming her or his behavior toward getting the kind of feedback from the other that I'm helpful, that I'm kind, that I'm lovable, that I'm needed. And so I'm doing all kinds of stuff, both behaviorally, emotionally, communication-wise, even facial expression-wise, to get a kind of loving feedback. And I want to be seen as, golden sunlight, like let's feel this good exchange between us. And so you could say that 2s are working it to get that. Sometimes it's more pure coming through because of their nature, and sometimes it's like I need to get it. So I'm activating myself to try to get this feedback of being loving, being helpful, being attractive. And I'll just keep going for brevity. There's always more I want to say about each time.
Yes, we could talk about each one of these for a week.
Maybe your guests will have to tune into future podcasts to get more full information on those. So the 3 is using this relational tracking to understand, how am I meeting the idealized image? So whatever's successful in a situation, whether it be business, like I'm on point and I'm really on my game, or I'm being the greatest partner or parent, or I'm the most awesome artist presenting my work, I'm going for the sense of being optimal, excellent, the best. And so I learn to morph and present myself in a way that I'm reading my audience to see, are they seeing me as winning, as meeting the mark? And that is a negotiation that happens without thinking, just like all these are, that I'm sensing all the time. How are you taking me? And I can adjust my presentation and my information and my body language so that I'm trying to find the way to get from you the thumbs up, like the gold star. Yes, you're the winner. You've got it. So that can be more behavioral, like I'm working really hard to get a promotion or to get approval, or it can just be in the exchange itself. The way I'm being seems like it's pleasing you or is what you expect.
I want to, before you go on to the last type, the word being is often sideswiped or repressed. It's more like there is a sense of that particular type doing things. There's an actual, in fact, oftentimes I've heard the tagline of a type 3 as being described as the human doing versus the human being. So could you talk just a bit about that before you go into the last one?
Yeah, and it also reminds me, I didn't use the titles. Some of the titles for 3 are the doer or the performer. And so it's as though I'm shaping myself to deliver something. So I might even look like I'm being, maybe I'm a great meditator, but inside I know I'm sort of putting it on. So the energy at 3 is go ahead. Like I just want to make stuff happen. Just like the 2 wants to make connection happen, 3 wants to make the goal happen so that I can get the regard. So there's a lot of, even if I'm still in the moment, there's a lot of activity and a sense of I'm going to do this, I'm going to handle this so that I can get that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And then our last type 4, is called
a lot of things. Could be the innovator, the tragic romantic, the individualist. So it has an eye toward wanting to be seen as unique or special, distinctive, excellent, particular. I want to be seen as authentic and deep and like nobody else is like me. And so even if I'm not getting the greatest regard back all the time, because if you're really different, you're going to get feedback from the normal bell curve that isn't always approving, I'll still get a kind of charge off of it because I'll feel special. Like, oh, they don't understand me because I'm deeper than they are. So it's often, though, still the same phenomenon of working it as the 2 and the 3. And it's like, how do I feel myself and communicate or display myself so that I'll be seen as, I would call it, it's not like shining star like the 3, but like brilliantly unique.
Unique. Yeah.
So maybe I'm nobody does philosophy the way I do it, or maybe nobody decorates their home the way I do it, or nobody can talk about this topic with this perspective that's so provocative the way that I do it.
Yeah.
So it's looking to be seen as not just special, but also real, authentic, and deep.
Mm-hmm. And when we were in the previous triad, we talked about this kind of seeking, or this underlying kind of core motivation for power and control. Could you talk a little bit more about how the seeing and what other aspects there are in the heart triad and what they're seeking?
Yeah. So generally they're seeking approval, prestige, affection, regard. And what that emotion that's getting navigated around there, coped with, tried to cover up, is something like sadness or shame or distress. Like, if I'm not something to you, who am I? It's a very tender and vulnerable place.
Yeah. So would you briefly talk about how that shows up in each one of the 2s, 3s, and 4s, sadness, distress, shame?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know how briefly I can do that, because it's, but I guess I'd say 4 pulls in the shame and identifies with it. 3 sidelines the shame and tries to be more of the not shame. And 2 kind of alternates being puffed up and like amazing and being kind of crushed with humiliation and embarrassment.
An excellent brief expression or
I thought I couldn't, but then I did.
You did it. You did a great job. And I know that we're just getting ready again to go to another break. So that was amazing and succinct and a really good description of what happens with each of them. Thank you. We're going to move in after our break into the head or mental intellectual center of intelligence. I thank you, listeners, for joining. I am Renee Siegel, and I have my wonderful guest, Sarah, who's going to come back and enlighten us in the head center right after break. If you'd like to know more about my work, you can find out at yourpurepotential.com. That is the letter U, the letter R, purepotential.com. Thank you so much, and see you after break. Welcome back to Enneagram Conversations. And I am going to turn it over to my guest, Sarah, to talk about the last center of intelligence that we're going to be describing today. And then we'll provide a brief summary for you. This is the head or the mental intellectual center, and it includes types 5, 6, and 7. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit more about each of these types, their names and what they're seeking and how they go about that?
Happy to. And first, maybe I'll say about the center itself. You called it the last, and often it's what people think of as the first. In this tradition, at least the way you and I engage it, it's like the first is the body. It's the foundation. And then when the body's here and well, you could say this evolutionarily as well, then this sort of more relational mammalian realm comes on. And then this is a later development. And if you think about child development, it's sort of that way too. So the last center that matures, and all of them keep maturing through life, we call the head center. And one way to put it is the head center, disconnected from the other 2, is kind of just like a orientation tool, right? It's reading and calculating what's going on and how to move, right? So what is this place? What's the language? How do people function? And what are the rules? And where's the map? And how do I navigate? And that's all of us have that, and they're usually commingling. But when it's concentrated, when our attention is concentrated in the head, we're tracking what's going to be the choice or the way of moving in the world that's safe and secure. Like, how do I predict the future so that I can be okay? So the 5, the 6, and the 7 are all trying to get to that in a particular way, and figuring it out through mental maps or ideology or sequences to try to achieve that. So the 5 is trying to do that. The 5 called the thinker or the observer, and it's the most deeply seated in the head, you might say. It's trying to understand the complexity of the world through withdrawing and observing to see the principles so I don't get overwhelmed. And do you feel how I sat back in my chair as I'm feeling 5? It's just sort of like, I want to take in as much as I can, because engagement actually can feel a little risky or overwhelming. So this is a way that my mind can try to see as broadly and clearly as possible what's going on here and how the heck do I engage, if I engage, right?
And do other people sense that withdrawal, or that, do you think that?
Often, yes. Folks who are sensitive to the relational field will often feel 5s are a bit up and back, that there's a withholding energetically. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So then the 6 is called the loyal skeptic, the questioner, the devil's advocate. This relationship with the head center is trying most purely to seek safety and security, and is also the most, I would say, study in contrast. It's yes and no. It's faith and doubt. It's like, okay, I want to go for safety, but I might do some stuff that undermines it. It's kind of has an energy of anxiety. All 3 of these, the underlying emotion here is fear, trying to cope with fear. And 6 is maybe the most sensitive to that. And so does one of 2 things, this is very simplified, to try to orient toward not having to be in a state of fear. Either becoming very dutiful and loyal and like ready for trouble, or kind of counteracting, like, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to go toward what might be threatening so that I can feel more secure. These are called the phobic and the counterphobic approaches. And most 6s have some of each, and most of them hang out in one more than the other. But it's either or going on, like, because we cannot actually be secure as human beings on this planet with bodies. We do our best, but when we're trying to approach it from the head, it's hard to win that game. So there's a lot going on, a lot of charge, a lot of management of anxiety, and trying to find the true way that I'll be safe, whether it's through friends or a belief system or through my behavior. I really want to get other people's backs and feel like we're going to be okay.
Yeah, and they're scanning for danger, the anticipation or preparation for danger somewhere.
Right. So a lot of predicting and sometimes worst case scenario management, like, what am I going to do if this happens? This is all ways of trying to find safety in the meantime, kind of feeling caught up.
And I think that's also where that phobic and counterphobic movement comes from. It's like, how do the 6 is navigating either, in anticipation of danger, either by plunging through it because I just can, and that just seems to mitigate the fear, or backing away from it. And I'm really glad that you pay, and we have, each type has a phobic and counterphobic stance, but it's really pronounced and more described and studied in the 6 than any other type. So I don't want people to walk away thinking that there's no type here that moves into or away from situations. There is a movement in advanced Enneagram studies that really look at that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Our last head type?
is the 7, which is often called the generalist or the epicure or the adventurer. This one's orientation toward fear is to imagine and plan for positive possibilities. So that's a very different movement than worst case scenario planning. It's best case scenario planning. Like, how do I get the goods? And that way I won't perish in this insecure universe. I'll make sure I have an exit plan. I'll make sure I have a backup plan. I'll make sure that even if I'm in something difficult, I'll be able to imagine something pleasurable. So that's a way of taking this insecurity of being human with the mind and trying to cope with it a different way, to imagine that I have the agency to get myself to something. And all of this is futuring, right? It matters more that I have a plan than what I'm actually experiencing or whether I enact that plan. It's helping soothe the mind by saying there's a way out or there's a better way that I'll get to.
Yeah. So we have talked about these 3 centers and recognized that we all have 3 centers. What happens when they're off center or one is off center and the other 2 are on? Can you talk about like the dilemmas of not integrating and then, the
well, we all live the effect of being somewhat off balance, some of us more so than others, and we're used to it. So it can be a little elusive. Like, what is it to have all 3 online or available? Because part of what sets up the Enneagram style and the worldview that comes with it is a distortion. Like, one early teacher of the Enneagram talks about, your primary center that you pay attention to is like a basketball and the other 2 are like golf balls. So it's like one of them just gets a lot more data. And so we emphasize that stuff, which makes us kind of intelligent and maybe a specialist, but it also makes us miss out on other really important data. So we drop the ball on things or we just don't even register them. So that could look 100 different ways, but the way it feels is, I think I'm trying to do the very best I can with what seems most important to me, and things are still going awry. What's up? Why isn't my relationship working when I'm paying so much attention to it?
Well, that's a place where I think we should probably spend just a moment, because generally there's something, most people come to the Enneagram with some sort of relational challenge. At least in my practice, and I would imagine it's probably true in many healthcare practitioners' practices, that people seek out the Enneagram or find this attraction to it to better understand themselves and their problems in relationships with others. So what center is really off in that? Or where do you think, is there something specific that's going on?
Well, I think there can be a lot of things going on, but the basic thing I would say is that we expect other people to go according to our program, whether that's our primary center of intelligence or our Enneagram worldview or another teaching that we're not touching on today, the dominant instinctual drive. We think that's the way the world works. That's how we got set up. And so why are other people not playing by our rules? And why are they such bad versions of us? Really, even humble types are judging everybody else according to their own platform. And so that's why the Enneagram, in these different layers of it, can be so helpful to help really give the other people we're in relationship with some grace or space to have a different reality. Then maybe it's possible to bridge the gap a little bit.
Yeah. So is there anything that you'd like to say in summary of all that we've discussed today? I know we could go on and talk about this forever.
Yeah, I guess one thing I might invite people to do, whether they know their Enneagram style or not, would be to see in a moment of your day, can you tap into each one, or the one you're not used to tapping into, or the one that you're used to tapping into, do it on purpose. Like, just start exploring. Hey, maybe there's some territory here that I am not making the most of. And what's it like when I include all of it? It's like changing this trio of instruments from being really drum heavy to bringing in the violin a little bit more. How does that change the music of my moment to moment life, you know?
Yes, yes, that's great. I want to thank you so much. I know that you have some things that you might want to share with our viewers and listeners about upcoming events where they can find out more about you and your work.
Uh-huh. Sure. Thanks for the invitation. One thing I'd say that's sort of related to the three centers is on my website, ninesight.com, there's a link to a free handbook on that relates to developing our three centers called Get Your Freedom Back. So if you're interested in a couple of exercises or things to do with that, that's a place you could find that. Upcoming, I'm presenting at the International Enneagram Association this summer on emotional wisdom and the Enneagram. So it is about the heart center, but it's about more than that in a way. And I'll probably be running a group on that in the fall. If you're interested, you can find information on my website coming up about that.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much, my friend, for joining me today and helping everybody to gain a deeper understanding of this. And I hope that you'll join us for our next episode where we are actually going to tour the types. So for those of you who have been sitting on your hands waiting to find out more about each type and how to land on your own type, join us at our next episode, which will be June 28th at 4 p.m. And thank you again, Sarah, for joining me.
Pleasure and honor, and thank you for inviting me. I always love talking about this stuff with you.
And I want a shout out to our production crew here. Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate your help so much.
Thanks for listening to Enneagram Conversations. Renee is on a mission to guide people towards cultivating inner observation, which assists with self-awareness and expansion. Identify your type, notice your patterns, and learn how to unlock the higher aspects of your Enneagram type. There is limitless potential inside you already, just waiting to be unveiled. Join Renee next time on this journey of self-discovery and create more purpose and power in your life. For more information about Renee and her work, visit youarepurepotential.com. That's the letter U, the letter R, purepotential.com. Until next time, remember, you are pure potential.